A dazzling night beneath the chandeliers, inside a room draped in silk and diamonds. A black woman was shoved onto the marble floor. Laughter erupted, phones were raised high, and a cold voice sliced through the air. "Someone like you doesn't belong here. You are nothing." No one in that grand hall knew. The woman they despised was, in truth, the CEO behind a global empire. And the moment they humiliated her would ignite a fire, one that would burn away the arrogance of a world still stained by racism. Chicago, a December evening. The city wore a thin coat of snow, tiny white flakes drifting sideways in the wind, like ashes from an ancient fire that had never gone out. On Gold Coast Avenue, limousines pulled up before a magnificent glass tower, where golden light spilled down onto a red carpet, stretching long like a glowing river. People said this was the grandest winter party of all, the Whitmore family's annual gala, where the wealthiest of the city gathered to flaunt their splendor under the name of charity. Crowds stepped out of luxury cars, men in black tuxedos, women in long silk gowns, diamonds glittering at their throats, laughter booming into the cold wind. Every gesture radiated the confidence of those convinced the world was made to belong to them. And then, from a modest black car, with no logo, no driver to open the door, a woman stepped out. Amara Johnson. A plain white fitted dress, no patterns, no frills. Her hair was pinned neatly, she had a small pair of earrings, and she wore pointed high heels. Everything about her was so simple one might mistake her for just another guest or for staff. But something in Amara's eyes made the observer pause, a sharp, quiet stillness, like a winter lake, so smooth it concealed the immense power beneath. Amara was 40. To many in the room above, that meant only one thing: a middle-aged black woman. Yet if they knew who she was, if they knew she was the one holding the Whitmore family's very fate, perhaps they would bow instead of turning away. But when has prejudice ever given anyone the chance to see deeply? The doorman, a large man in a heavy coat, clipboard in hand, frowned slightly as Amara approached. He did not lift his head in greeting as he had for the white couples who had just passed. Instead, he threw up a hand, stopping her with a brusque motion, as though shooing her away. "Back entrance, ma'am. Staff don't use the main door." His voice was flat, like reciting a line he'd repeated many times. But in his eyes there was something more. The natural certainty that this woman, with that skin, that dress, could not possibly belong among the elegant stream moving up the red carpet. Amara stood still. The words were not unfamiliar. All her life, she had heard enough. "You don't belong. Go another way. This isn't your place." But at this moment, in front of a building that, on paper, she owned through an anonymous real estate company, those words fell even more bitterly. She drew a breath, her voice calm and low. "I have an invitation." The guard glanced at the thick, gold-edged card Amara handed him, but instead of checking it quickly as he had for other guests, he kept it for a long moment, turning it this way and that. The light reflected on her face as though she were being examined for fraud. After a clumsy show, he squinted. "Your name isn't on the list." Behind her, a couple arrived. Their card barely brushed his hand before he returned it with a warm smile. "Welcome. Have a wonderful evening." Amara heard it, and unconsciously tightened her grip on her purse. The contrast was too stark. Harsh scrutiny on one side, respectful greeting on the other. All for nothing but a difference in skin. Half an hour passed. Amara still stood outside, snow resting lightly on her shoulders. Now and then, the guard stuck his head out to say, "We're still verifying." But through the glass, she could see clearly. He was laughing and chatting with colleagues, never making a single call. Guests passed by. Some glanced at her, some smirked. One woman whispered to her husband, "Poor thing, they think wearing a white dress is enough to get in." Amara heard it, but she didn't react. Years in the business world had taught her that silence can sometimes be stronger than any justification. In her mind, old memories returned. Her grandmother bent over scrubbing floors in gleaming white mansions, rough hands soaking in bleach, the hoarse voice. "You must stand tall, Amara. Don't let anyone make you small." 40 years, and the world had not changed much. Finally, after nearly an hour, the guard handed back her card and ID, jerking his chin reluctantly. "You can go in, but don't cause trouble." No apology, no smile. Amara stepped through the revolving glass door. Warmth washed over her. Violin music floated down from the upper floors. Crystal light glittered above. The scent of expensive wine spread through the air. But inside her, a storm had begun to stir. The Whitmore family's gala had only just opened, and they had no idea that the woman they had dismissed at the door was the very one who would decide the survival of their dynasty tonight. The music in the grand hall chimed like crystal droplets falling onto a still lake. Laughter mingled with the clink of crystal glasses, weaving a lavish chorus. Servers in white shirts moved in measured patterns, silver trays gleaming with champagne. Everything in the Whitmore Gala was staged like a sumptuous play. Where power was displayed, pride paraded, and compassion reduced to a decorative prop. Amara stepped inside. Her pure white dress stood in sharp contrast against the long red carpet and the dazzling gowns surrounding her. No one knew who she was, and no one cared. The only thing that drew their eyes toward her was her skin. A brief hush skimmed the room, then whispers rippled, soft yet cutting. "Why is a server using this entrance? She must be in the wrong place. People of color rarely show up at parties like this." Amara heard it all. Yet she remained calm, walking with steady steps, her heels tapping against the marble floor like a drum inside her chest. At the far end, Margaret Whitmore, the hostess of the gala, spotted the unwelcome presence at once. At 60, she still bore the haughty air of one who believed social status was an armor no blade could pierce. A red silk gown wrapped around her body, diamonds spilling across her neck, her gaze cold as ice. When Margaret saw Amara, her lips curved into a half-smile sharp as a blade. Her voice rang across the room, loud enough for many to hear. "Oh heavens, how did the maid slip in here?" The music faltered for a beat. A few heads turned, then crude laughter burst. A man nearby poured himself another drink and roared, "Chicago must be slipping these days. Anyone can get into a Whitmore party, even outsiders." The laughter swelled. Phones shot up. Lenses crowded toward Amara's face as if she were a live comedy act. Amara stopped. Her eyes locked on Margaret's. No defense, no forced smile, only silence, the kind that unsettled a few, though most continued to laugh as if relishing free entertainment. In the crowd, Travis Whitmore, the eldest son, 32, notorious for his debauchery, raised a glass of whiskey. His face was flushed from drink, his voice slurred but loud. "Hey, Mom, maybe she wandered in from the slums. Or did someone forget to shut the kitchen door?" His friends erupted, pounding each other's backs. A young woman chimed in. "Careful, Travis. She might be housekeeping. Maybe she's just looking for a broom." The laughter rolled like a crashing wave across the hall. Amara drew a long breath. Heat flared in her chest, but she pressed it down, keeping her face composed. Each laugh was a blade, but she would not let them see her bleed. A server hesitated as Amara approached the bar. She only wanted a glass of water, her throat parched after nearly an hour in the snow. But the bartender's eyes didn't rest on her. Instead, he flicked a glance at Margaret, awaiting instructions. Margaret gave the faintest shake of her head. At once the bartender pressed his lips together and stepped back. No glass was offered. Margaret spoke again, this time not in a whisper, but as a public decree. "No service, we don't let staff mingle with the guests." The air cracked open with fresh laughter. A middle-aged guest sneered. "She ought to know her place. Some places aren't meant for everyone." Amara was about to turn away when the sharp click of high heels cut across the floor. Charlotte Whitmore, the youngest daughter, her blue eyes icy, her beauty edged with a blade's sharpness. Charlotte smiled sweetly, holding a glass of deep Bordeaux. Her voice dripped honey, each word laced with poison. "You look thirsty, poor thing, let me help." The room hushed, waiting. This time they didn't need direct insults. They wanted a performance. Amara looked at the glass of wine. For a fleeting second she thought, perhaps this was a small gesture of kindness. She inclined her head slightly and reached out her hand. But at that very moment, Charlotte tilted her wrist. A red streak spilled like blood, soaking the pristine white dress. The room exploded. Laughter thundered, glasses clattered, phones flashed like fireworks. Charlotte feigned alarm, a hand to her mouth. "Oh my, I'm so clumsy. This girl is awkward." Margaret stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. "This is exactly what I meant. When those who don't belong push their way in, they only bring trouble." Travis kept filming, shouting, "This will be the viral clip of the night. A stupid maid wrecks the gala." Amara looked down at her drenched dress, the wine spreading wide like a wound that could not be hidden. The laughter transformed the glittering hall into a pitiless arena. In their eyes, she was someone who didn't belong, no reason needed, no explanation, just because of her skin. She drew a deep breath, her hand clenched tightly around her small purse, and in her eyes a flame blazed to life. The crowd did not yet know that the moment they made her their joke was the very moment they signed the death warrant for their dynasty. The laughter in the hall still thundered like rolling storms, each burst crashing against the marble walls, ricocheting across the polished floor. Phones were raised high, their flashes firing in cruel bursts, like a sky full of malicious fireworks. On that winter night, beneath chandeliers blazing with hundreds of lights, the glittering ballroom had turned into a merciless circus, and Amara, a black woman, was the sole prey displayed for ridicule. Her once pristine white gown was now drenched in deep crimson. Bordeaux streamed down its folds, soaking into the fabric, dripping in tiny beads onto the cold stone floor. Each drop landed with a dry, crisp click, small but clear, like the measured strike of a judge's gavel against wood. Amara remained seated on the icy floor for a moment, not because she had fallen, but because she was letting the room fully reveal the extent of its cruelty. Margaret Whitmore stood only steps away, her hand clenching a champagne flute, eyes gleaming with the intoxication of triumph. Charlotte feigned shock, a hand to her chest, though her lips still curved upward. Travis laughed so hard he wheezed, replaying the video over and over for his jeering friends. Around them, guests smirked behind cupped hands, some recorded with their phones, others whispered eagerly, determined not to miss a single second of their free entertainment. Then Amara placed one hand on the floor and began to rise. A simple movement, ordinary on any other day. But here, in the thick air vibrating with laughter, it became a moment that seized the entire room. She rose bit by bit. Her dress fell around her, stained red like a tragic canvas. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and her eyes, the eyes of a woman who had weathered storms uncountable, now met this new gale without the slightest tremor. The laughter faltered. A few recording phones were lowered without thought. No one could explain why, but silence began to seep through the cracks, slow and insistent, like water into stone. Travis tried to laugh again, forcing it loudly, but the sound cracked dry in the air. His friends didn't echo him. Amara said nothing. She merely smoothed the wet fabric of her dress. The gesture was slow, deliberate, serene, as though she were brushing away invisible dust, not an act of public humiliation. Then she tucked back a stray curl from her cheek and lifted her head so the chandelier light struck her eyes, cold as ice, deep as an abyss. The crowd shifted uneasily. Those who had mocked her now felt a chill climb their spines. They no longer saw a woman out of place. They saw something else, a quiet strength, hard to name, impossible to ignore. It wasn't anger, it wasn't tears. It was something far more unnerving, absolute composure. Margaret frowned, stepping closer, her voice dripping with disdain. You think standing up will make you part of this place? Listen carefully. You will never belong to us. You are a stain, and stains have only one place, underfoot. The words fell sharp as broken glass, but this time the room did not erupt in laughter. A few guests glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Because Amara still did not react. She turned her head, letting her gaze sweep across the hall, not hurried, not desperate, simply meeting one pair of eyes after another. And in those fleeting seconds, each person she looked at felt something stir inside, something uncomfortable, something like shame. No shouting, no struggle, only presence, so strong it strangled laughter in the throat. A sharp drip. Another bead of wine slid from her hem to the floor. Tiny sound, yet in the silence it echoed like the tick of a countdown clock. Someone swallowed hard. A woman quickly set down her glass, as if her hand had begun to tremble. The entire hall, moments ago an ocean of laughter, had thickened into a chamber where everyone waited for something to ignite, something they couldn't yet name. Amara lifted her hand, wiped a streak of wine from her wrist. Then she reached into her purse and drew out her phone. Her finger brushed the screen. The whole room stared, not daring even to breathe. In the glaring light of that moment, the picture was clear. A black woman, mocked, scorned, turned into a joke, now stood tall, phone in hand, as though holding the invisible scales of a courtroom. No one knew who she was, but deep in their minds a vague, creeping fear had begun to rise. Charlotte broke the silence first, her voice feigning sweetness. Oh, don't misunderstand, we were just joking. You know, a little humour for the party. But her voice trembled, the steadiness was gone. Amara turned her eyes on Charlotte. She did not speak, but that look was a mirror, reflecting every ounce of cruelty just moments before, flushing Charlotte's face red, leaving her lips quivering without sound. From a corner, Travis muttered, "What's happening? Why is everyone so quiet?" No one answered. Harrison Whitmore, the patriarch, watched from afar, his brow furrowed. A thin unease crept into his chest. A black woman, a white gown now soaked in red, and a silence that had stolen the room's breath. He couldn't explain it, but it felt as though he stood at the edge of a storm, no winds yet, but the air already thick with its scent. Amara lowered her phone. She did not rush to dial. She held it like a signal. Then, in a low, steady voice, she spoke for the first time since entering. "I don't need anyone in this room to accept me. I know who I am." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, and the hall was so silent that every word landed heavy, unshakable. The words were simple, yet they fell like a stone into still water. Rings spread outward, touching every chest, leaving a sting. And in that silence people began to realize this night would not end like the others. No, this was only the beginning. The music in the hall had died completely. The violins were still there, but the musicians had lowered their bows, their eyes fixed on the black woman standing at the center of the marble floor, stained red with wine. Amara did not need to scream. She stood tall, phone in hand, her back still damp and cold from the Bordeaux they had deliberately poured on her moments earlier. In that silence, her phone suddenly vibrated. A familiar ringtone rang out, simple, straightforward, slicing through the heavy air. Amara glanced at the screen, then answered. Her voice was steady, low, resolute. "Johnson." The voice on the other end cut clean through the microphone, male, sharp, professional. "Good evening, Mrs. Johnson. This is David, your legal counsel. I just wanted to confirm the $3 billion merger deal with Whitmore has been finalized. All that remains is your signature and the deal will be announced tonight." The silence was shattered. Dozens of eyes snapped toward Amara. $3 billion? A merger with Whitmore? The words struck like lightning across a clear sky. Amara's gaze swept the room, her lips curling faintly. Her voice came even, but hard as steel. "David, cancel everything, every contract, every agreement, immediately." A pause hummed on the line. I beg your pardon? Cancel? The entire deal? Amara nodded slowly, as if he were standing right before her. Yes, all of it. Leave not a single page binding us. Burn it to the ground. Whispers raced outward like fire racing across dry grass. Phones that had been recording moments earlier dropped to their sides, faces drained pale. They didn't yet fully understand, but they knew something monumental had just shifted. Travis scowled, forcing out a mocking laugh, trying to reclaim the room. Oh, perfect. Now our maid is playing billionaire. Wonderful script. Who's writing this one? A few uneasy chuckles followed, hollow, stripped of their earlier bravado. Those closest to Amara felt the weight in her voice, and they knew this was no act. Margaret arched a brow, arms folded across her chest. You expect us to believe a few words over a phone call? That some ordinary black woman commands a $3 billion deal? Don't be ridiculous. Amara didn't answer. She reached into her purse and drew out a card, pitch black, edged in platinum. Her name, engraved deep, glimmered beneath the chandelier. Amara Johnson, founder and CEO, Johnson Global Holdings. She placed the card on a crystal table beside her. The metallic edge struck glass with a sharp clink that sliced through the silence. The ballroom froze. Harrison Whitmore, the patriarch, the man who had carried his family through years of debt, stood surrounded by his circle of peers. When his eyes fell on the name etched into that card, his face drained of color. His lips trembled, the glass in his hand slipped, crashing against the marble floor, shattering with a sound that rang like a gunshot. Guests startled. A chorus of whispers broke loose, stuttering, shaken. Amara Johnson, isn't that... My God, her company's worth over $60 billion. This woman, she is her. Margaret spun toward her husband, her voice pitched high with panic. Harrison, say something. This is a trick. A woman like her. It's impossible. But Harrison stood frozen, his eyes hollow, breath shallow. In that instant, he understood everything. Understood that his family had just slammed shut their final door to salvation. Amara turned, her gaze sweeping the hall once more. Her voice rang out, each word carved sharp as if into stone. You called me nothing. You refused me a glass of water. You made me your entertainment, because of my skin. But let me remind you, I am Amara Johnson, the very woman whose signature you have been begging for, to save the Whitmore name. Silence. Absolute. The ticking of the wall clock struck like a war drum. Amara tightened her grip on her phone, then turned her back, strolling, deliberately, each step heavy with authority. And the room, once so practiced in looking down on others, could do nothing but bow inward, following the steps of the woman they had just shamed. Charlotte's hand shook, wine spilling from her glass. Travis, who constantly barked the loudest, swallowed hard, and Margaret, the queen of Chicago's social scene, felt her knees tremble for the first time in her life. No shouting, no threats. Just a name, Amara Johnson, and the weight of it was enough to crush the pride of an entire room. And the storm had only just begun. The last sound in the grand hall was the sharp shatter of glass from Harrison Whitmore's fallen wine. Shards scattered across the marble floor, glinting like the broken remnants of a dynasty coming apart. Harrison stood frozen, his hand trembling and empty. The color drained from his face, his eyes wide as if he had just seen a ghost. The man once proud to call himself the savior of Chicago now looked nothing more than an old, frail figure teetering on the edge of collapse. No, it can't be. His voice cracked, breaking into a whisper. It can't be you, Amara Johnson. Impossible. He lifted his gaze toward the crowd, desperate for someone to confirm it was all a cruel trick. But all he met were eyes of pity, the look, the high-born reserve for one who is already fallen. Margaret lunged forward, snatching the business card from the table. Her eyes flickered over the platinum letters, then flew wide. Her face blanched, her lips trembling. No! This is forged! It has to be fake! Margaret screamed, her voice sharp yet unsteady. She raised the card high, calling to the guests. Don't be fooled. A black woman, from nowhere. She could never be the CEO of a global empire. This is nothing but a cheap charade. Her words dropped heavy into the silence, and no one responded. The guests who once howled with laughter now stood mute, avoiding Amara's gaze. None dared join in. Margaret felt the weight of isolation press down, like an actress clinging to a role on a stage that had already gone dark. From the corner, Travis snarled, trying to revive his swagger. "You've all lost your minds. She's a joke. Trash my mother just crushed underfoot. Don't believe a word of it." He yanked out his phone, holding high the video of Amara, stained and on the floor, shouting, This is the truth. A clumsy, pathetic woman, as if she's some billionaire CEO." But in the graveyard silence, his voice rang hollow, desperate. A few guests shook their heads. An older man sighed softly. "That boy doesn't realize the very video he clings to is the death sentence for his family." Charlotte, the youngest daughter, stumbled toward her father, tears cutting tracks through her perfect makeup. "Father, say something. Weren't we on the brink of resurrection? The deal, the money, all of it. Where is it now?" Her voice cracked, her hands clutching at Harrison's arm. But he stood unmoving, a stone statue fissuring under weight. Charlotte turned to Amara, sobbing openly. You can't do this. You can't destroy an entire family over a few cruel jokes. You must understand, we didn't mean it." But Amara did not soften. She regarded Charlotte as one might consider a tawdry play. Only minutes ago, this same young woman had smiled sweetly before spilling red wine across her white dress. Margaret found her voice again, shrieking at her husband. "Harrison, say something! Why are you just standing there? We are Whitmores. An outsider cannot bring us down. Say something!" But Harrison could only rasp two words, broken and final. "We're finished." The room froze. The words tolled like a funeral bell, sealing an irreversible collapse. Amara stood firm, needing no raised voice, no tirade. She spoke a single sentence, calm and measured, each word a blade pressed to their hearts. "You signed your sentence the moment you chose to see me not as a human being, but as a stain." Whispers rippled outward, flames racing through dry timber. "She is Amara Johnson. Whitmore. They're done. My God, $3 billion, gone. They just burned their family name." Travis, drunk and flailing in panic, shouted still. "This is reverse racism. You're doing this because we're white. You'll pay for this. We'll sue. Amara turned, her eyes calm yet sharp. "No, Travis. This is not reverse racism. This is the bill that has come due for the choices you made, and now it's time to pay." The hall froze in a suffocating chill. Margaret staggered, clutching the card as if it were her last lifeline. Charlotte sobbed into her father's shoulder. Travis raged in place, but the terrible silence swallowed his voice. Harrison's sunken eyes flickered with despair as he muttered, $3 billion, gone like smoke, all because of one moment of arrogance, because we could not see a person as a person. The Whitmore family, once kings of Chicago, now dangled on the edge of ruin, and everyone in that hall understood. Amara alone held the scales of their fate. The storm had not yet fully broken, but the black clouds had gathered, circling above, heavy and ready to strike. In the glittering hall, the air had grown so heavy it could be sliced with a knife. Guests who once laughed loudly and raised glasses now stood frozen, avoiding each other's eyes. Everything hung suspended, until Amara lifted her phone once more. Her voice rang clear, calm. "Patricia, execute immediately." From the other end came a steady, measured woman's voice. "Understood, Mrs. Johnson. The legal team is en route." The words echoed from the phone's speaker, falling into the ballroom like a verdict freshly delivered. Moments later, the massive double doors swung open. A line of figures in dark suits strode in, the rhythm of polished shoes tapping across the floor. They carried no trays of wine, offered no polite smiles. In their hands were thick binders, leather-bound and stamped with seals. 12 lawyers, the legal arm of Johnson Global Holdings, entered like a battalion. Their posture is straight, their faces stern, their eyes sweeping the room with icy precision. The gala atmosphere curdled instantly into the air of a courtroom. At the front stepped an older woman, silver threaded in her hair, but sharp fire in her gaze. Patricia Green, chief counsel, is the one known as the Iron Hand of corporate law. She set her briefcase on the crystal table, opened it, and drew out a thick file. Her voice carried, resonant without a microphone. On behalf of Johnson Global Holdings, I hereby declare the cancellation of all contracts signed or under negotiation with Whitmore Enterprises. The hall trembled. Gasps, frantic whispers spread like cracks in glass. Patricia pressed on, each word the slam of a coffin nail. The $3 billion merger agreement terminated. All real estate contracts in Chicago are void. All technology and supply deals are nullified effective immediately. Every loan, line of credit, and working capital extended to Whitmore Enterprises recalled this very night. Each pronouncement fell like a clean blade upon the Whitmore family's faltering body. Harrison collapsed into a chair, clutching his head. He knew, with each clause read aloud, the empire he had built on stacked loans was being torn limb from limb. Margaret staggered, a twisted smile tugging her lips as she tried to laugh. Her voice came shrill, cracking. "You can't do this. This is a charity gala, not a courtroom. This is just a misunderstanding, just a joke." Patricia raised her head, her eyes cold as steel. "No, Mrs. Whitmore, this is not a joke. This is a consequence." The word consequence rang through the hall, sending shivers down spines. Charlotte broke into sobs, her trembling hands gripping the back of a chair. "Please, Mrs. Johnson, please don't do this. We'll apologize. We'll make it right. Just give us a chance." Amara turned her gaze toward her. Her face betrayed nothing. Her eyes were like frozen lakes, unyielding, fathomless. "A chance?" Her voice was low, deliberate. "You had your chance. The moment I walked through that door, that was it. And what did you choose? You chose contempt. You chose to make me your spectacle. Chances never come twice." Charlotte wept openly, but no one dared go to her. Travis, refusing to surrender, roared drunkenly, his face blotched with rage. "This is abuse of power. This is reverse racism. You're only doing this because you're black and we're white. We'll sue you into the ground." A cold laugh escaped Amara's lips. She met his eyes. "No, Travis. This isn't about color. It's about character. You believed your skin gave you license to belittle others, and now that same skin won't save you from the truth." He froze, his mouth hanging open, stripped of words. Patricia turned to Amara, awaiting the final order. Amara gave a single, steady nod. Patricia's voice rose, decisive. "As legal counsel, I formally declare, as of this moment, Johnson Global Holdings severs all ties with Whitmore Enterprises. All assets, capital, and associated interests are being recalled. Partnering banks have been notified. The Whitmore family's accounts will be frozen the instant we leave this hall. Pages rifled. Contracts were pulled out, stamped in red, and dropped onto the table. The harsh thud of each seal echoed like a judge's gavel. Panic surged. Some guests who had once shaken hands with the Whitmores quickly stepped back, deleting their numbers. A few hurriedly left the gala, eager to sever any connection. On social media, videos of Amara's humiliation, recorded only minutes earlier, were already streaming live. But now, the viewers weren't laughing. They were outraged. They shared, they spread, turning the Whitmores' glittering gala into damning evidence of arrogance and racism. Hashtags began to climb like wildfire. Whitmore racism. The price of arrogance. Respect has no color. Amara stood at the center of it all, her white gown stained deep red, heavy upon her frame. But no longer was it a mark of disgrace. It had become the emblem of judgment. Judgment she now delivered. Her voice rang out resolute like the final decree of a judge closing court. "You called me nothing. Yet tonight I will show the world the cost of cruelty and racism. You have not only lost a deal, you have lost your future." Harrison slumped in his chair, his shoulders quaking. Margaret staggered back, gripping her champagne glass so hard it shattered, blood dripping from her fingers unnoticed. Charlotte sobbed in despair. Travis stood mute, His gaze sunk to the marble floor, as if his very breath had been ripped away. The trial had begun, and the Whitmore family had just heard the toll of their first death knell. The hall was suffocatingly silent. Each step of Johnson Global's legal team echoed like the pounding of nails into a coffin lid. The wealthy guests, once so accustomed to laughter and bravado, now glanced nervously at one another, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Amara stood at the center, tall as a monument. Her white gown, now heavy and stained crimson, no longer looked like ruin. In their eyes, she blazed like a torch. Her voice rose, measured, calm, yet cutting through every chest. "You have just lost a deal worth $3 billion, but don't think that money will vanish. No, it will be reborn, but not for the Whitmores." A ripple of whispers coursed across the hall. Amara continued, her tone cold yet regal. "I am founding the Harriet Fund, named for the woman who fought to break the chains of slavery, a reminder that freedom and dignity cannot be buried. Every dollar from this cancelled deal will flow into that fund, and it will be dedicated to those whom this society has ignored, the black entrepreneurs, the women of color, the communities dismissed as nothing." The scratch of Patricia's pen sliced the air as she signed, a single stroke marking history. The lawyers nodded in unison, as though a new contract had been birthed in the very heart of the gala. Margaret staggered, her voice shattering like glass. "No, you can't. $3 billion, you can't give it to them." Amara turned, her gaze like steel. "That's my grandmother, the woman who bent her back scrubbing floors in houses like yours, so I could have an education. My grandmother was once called nothing, but her sacrifice built an empire, and tonight I repay that debt." Her words struck like thunder. Many guests lowered their heads, unable to meet her eyes. At the back of the hall, several women of color among the serving staff clasped their hands to their mouths, tears brimming. They understood. This moment was not only Amara's, it belonged to all who had ever been disregarded. Travis suddenly lurched to his feet, his face red, his drunkenness twisting into frenzy. "This is madness! This is reverse racism! You're destroying us because you're black and we're white! We'll sue you into the ground!" His screams cracked with desperation, but no one echoed him. The guests only looked on with disgust, not at Amara, but at him. Amara's gaze fell on him, not angry, only cold with pity. "No, Travis. This isn't reverse racism. This is the bill. Tonight, your family pays in full for years of contempt. This isn't about the color of my skin. It's about your arrogance. When you believed skin alone could define a human's worth, you signed your sentence." Her voice was calm, yet it resounded like a final decree. Charlotte stumbled forward, her face streaked with tears, hands clasped in pleading. "Please, please, Mrs. Johnson, stop this. We'll apologize. We'll confess publicly. Please, don't take everything away." Amara looked at her. There was no hatred in her gaze anymore, only the detached clarity of a judge reading a verdict already sealed. "You called me nothing. Tonight I'll teach you what nothing means, and it begins now." The room stood stunned. The guests, once gleeful spectators to cruelty, were now unwilling witnesses to a societal reckoning. They realized they had just seen history turn. A black woman, humiliated in public, had not crumbled. She had forged her humiliation into a sword, her silence into the gavel of justice, and brought it down upon the arrogant. In that charged space, Amara's voice rose one final time, soft but unyielding. "Dignity has no color, but arrogance always carries a price, and tonight the Whitmores have paid it with everything they had." Margaret collapsed into a chair, her face contorted, hands trembling as she clutched the black business card, the last proof of a truth she could no longer deny. Harrison hung his head, choking like a man who had lost it all. Travis stood mute, eyes hollow. Charlotte sobbed, mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. And Amara stood firm, the chandelier's light spilling across her face, her shadow stretching long across the marble floor, like a living declaration that sometimes silence thunders louder than screams. As Amara's final words fell, a sharp ting rang out from the corner of the hall, then another, and then dozens, hundreds, like raindrops falling in the night. People looked down at their phones, and within seconds, the room glowed faintly blue. Videos were spreading at the speed of light, Margaret screaming in Amara's face, Travis hurling insults, Amara standing silent in her wine-soaked gown. On Twitter, a new hashtag flared into life. She is not nothing. Within 10 minutes, it had climbed to the #1 trend across the nation. Outside the hotel, reporters who had come expecting to cover an elite winter gala now swarmed like a hive split open. Cameras, microphones, and flashes of light encircled the building. Limousines roared away in panic, leaving behind scraps of silk gowns and dazed, shattered faces. "Whitmore just lost everything," a voice whispered among the stunned guests. But a microphone caught it, and within minutes that sentence was everywhere, a verdict no one could reverse. In a small apartment in Harlem, a single mother set down a bowl of rice for her child. She unlocked her phone and saw Amara standing in the grand hall, blood seeping into her white dress, yet her chin held high. The woman whispered, "She's like us, only stronger." In a college dorm room, a group of black students shouted, hugging one another as "Had She Is Not Nothing" overtook even Oscars. In a modest home in suburban Virginia, an elderly white veteran sat quietly before the screen, his eyes wet. He murmured, "I should have stood up for women like her, years ago." Meanwhile, upstairs in the hotel, the Whitmores huddled in a private suite. Phones rang non-stop, not congratulations but cancellations. Calls cutting deals, emails severing partnerships, messages urging resignations from boards. Within an hour, Whitmore Capital's stock had plunged 17%. By midnight, it had crashed another 30%. Analysts called it the fastest collapse in the history of an American financial dynasty. Travis raged, smashing a bottle of liquor. "No, impossible. Just because of one black woman, we can't fall because of that trash." Charlotte sobbed, clutching her head. "Travis, stop. Don't you see? The whole country is watching us, and they're standing with her. No one is with us anymore." Margaret sat motionless, eyes fixed on the void. A century of power, a family once untouchable, undone in a single night. She muttered, broken, almost mad. "They called her. Not nothing, but everything." And Amara did not leave through a back door. She walked straight out into the grand lobby, where dozens of reporters and cameras awaited. Flashes erupted. Voices roared. "Amara, do you have anything you want to say to America?" She paused, adjusted the blood-stained shoulder of her gown, and spoke with calm clarity. "Tonight is not the fall of a family. It is the fall of a habit, the habit of demeaning others for the color of their skin. And I believe from this night on, we must relearn how to see human dignity." Then she walked on without another word. That night, America did not sleep. News channels replayed the footage again and again. Amara's words were quoted, Margaret's expression dissected. They called it the Gala Reckoning. And everywhere, millions who had long endured quiet injustice felt a spark of hope, that silence can thunder, that dignity can topple even the proudest of empires. The next morning, America woke with a different rhythm in its chest. Newspapers, television, radio, everywhere echoed the same name, Amara Lewis. On the front page of the New York Times, her image filled the fold, her blood-stained white gown, her shoulders squared, standing tall in the center of the gala hall. Beneath the headline, "The Woman Who Brought an Empire to Its Knees." In Chicago, a group of black high school girls gathered outside their school gates, each wearing a T-shirt with the words, "She is not nothing." When the principal scolded them, a 16-year-old girl answered softly, "No, sir, she's us, and we're not silent anymore." A teacher captured the scene on video. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. In Los Angeles, street artists painted Amara's portrait across concrete walls, under the slogan, "Dignity is power." The graffiti spread, untouched, even guarded by residents who saw it as the emblem of a new era, an era where dignity mattered more than privilege. In Alabama, where America's past still carried deep scars, a small church held a prayer service for Our Sister Amara. In the swell of gospel voices, the old pastor spoke slowly. Last night, a woman redefined strength, not through fists, not through wealth, but through proud silence. And when she lifted her head, we lifted ours. The congregation answered, Amen, their voices rolling like waves beneath the vaulted ceiling. Meanwhile, Amara's Harriet Fund shocked the nation by raising millions of dollars within 48 hours. Business leaders who once hesitated now signed checks publicly. Corporations announced partnerships to funnel investments into education and healthcare for marginalized communities. One bank director, silent at the gala, called Amara, his voice breaking. Last night I didn't dare to stand by you, but today I refuse to stand aside. My bank will fund full scholarships for 200 black students this year. Amara was quiet for a moment before replying. Not for me, do it for the next generation. But the movement sparked backlash too. Conservative outlets blasted her as destroying tradition and peddling cheap dignity politics. One commentator sneered, Amara isn't a victim, she's a strategist, exploiting her skin color to topple a respectable family. Yet the attacks only fueled the fire. In response, voices rose louder. A former police officer posted a video. Respectable? I once stopped a woman only because she was black. I know the look of humiliation. I saw it again last night in Amara's eyes. If you call that respectability, you've forgotten what it means to be human. Across America, peaceful marches filled the streets. Placards bore only two words, not nothing. The sight brought tears, because it wasn't just about Amara. It was about generations silenced, ignored, forced to the floor for the color of their skin. Amara, amid the uproar and the praise, moved at her own quiet pace. She avoided television tours and declined most speaking invitations. Instead, she sat in her modest office by a window overlooking a park, where teenagers laughed together. She wrote in her journal, "Honor is not what I seek. I want a world where no child ever asks their mother, 'Mom, am I invisible?'" She knew the fire had been lit, and this time it would not go out. One late autumn afternoon, as Hudson winds scattered crimson maple leaves along the stone steps of the United Nations, thousands sat waiting inside. Business leaders, senators, activists, students, all holding their breath. When Amara Lewis stepped onto the podium, the hall fell still. She did not wear a gown or jewels, just a simple black suit, her hair neatly tied. Yet her eyes, calm, radiant, commanded every camera to lower in reverence. The host introduced her as the woman who sparked a global dignity movement. Applause thundered, but Amara raised her hand gently. It stopped. She set down her notes without reading a line. Her voice was low, deliberate, each word distinct. Months ago, I was shoved onto a marble floor in front of hundreds. No one reached down to help. They laughed, they filmed, and one called me nothing. The hall froze. She drew a steady breath. But do you know what? That word, nothing, became a fire. It did not just lift me, it lifted an entire community. Because the truth is, we have never been nothing. We are everything when we stand together. Applause erupted again, this time mingled with tears. Politicians who once dodged conversations on race wiped their eyes. Amara pressed on. I don't stand here for revenge nor pity. I stand here to speak to the children bullied for their skin, to the mothers forgotten in waiting rooms, to the fathers bowed under injustice. You are not invisible. You are not nothing. You are proof that dignity cannot be stolen. Outside, thousands watched on giant screens. When those words rang out, the crowd erupted in a single chant. Not nothing, not nothing! The cry rolled like surf through city blocks, across the river, echoing in every corner. When the speech ended, Amara did not wave like a politician. She stepped down, blending into the crowd, reaching for the hand of a young, brown-skinned girl in the front row. The child whispered, I want to grow up to be like you. Amara smiled gently and answered, No, sweetheart, grow up to be yourself, but never let anyone tell you you're nothing. Weeks later, photographs of that moment were displayed at the Smithsonian. Amara, in her black suit, standing before thousands, eyes alight. Beneath the image, words carved in steel. Dignity is the language the world understands best. That night, back home, Amara sat alone by her window, gazing out at the glowing city. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Offers, invitations, praise. She pushed them aside. Opening her old journal, she turned to the first trembling line she had ever written. Am I invisible? With firm hand she struck it through, and beneath wrote, I have never been invisible, and I will live to ensure no one else ever feels that way again. The door closed, but the fire had already spread into generations who would never meet Amara, but who would live in the light of her legacy, the legacy of dignity, courage, and truth.